Felon disenfranchisement is wrong because it affects the rights of American citizens and their lives even after completing their sentences. Felony disenfranchisement refers to the prohibition of one person from voting on the reason that they have been convicted of a felony. Today, over 6 million Americans have lost the right to vote. This number has doubled over the last 20 years. The number of disenfranchised people varies from state to state, with the most famous case being Florida, where almost 10% of their population, or about 1.7 million people, are disenfranchised. In some states, it is relatively easy to gain your voting power back. In Maine, for example, there are no voting restrictions at all. Currently incarcerated people can vote in their elections. The majority of states restore rights after the person has fully completed their sentence, including parole and probation. Other states only restrict certain felonies from voting, such as murder. There are only 3 states, including Florida, where former inmates must go through a clemency hearing process. This process can often take upwards of 10 years and rarely results in restoration of rights. Many people believe that convicted felons shouldn't have the right to vote because they demonstrated such poor decision-making.
If they committed crimes, are they the best people to judge some of these laws that are to be passed?
Would we rather live in a society where there are no consequences for our actions?
I just think that they've done something wrong, so I don't really think they should be allowed to be voting.
Lawmakers tend to agree with these sentiments.
We're talking about rapists, murderers, robbers, and even terrorists or spies. Do we want to see convicted terrorists who seek to destroy this country voting in elections?
This hasn't stopped people from campaigning to restore voting rights. In the case of many people, the one choice that they made in their youth has impacted them far beyond their sentencing. In fact, over half of those disenfranchised have fully completed their sentences. They still cannot vote on initiatives that affect them and their children. They have lost their voice.
At what point do we break the cycle? At what point are we able to say, hey, you know what? I am a citizen enough. You want me to work. You want me to pay taxes. You want me to make sure I take care of my family, but yet I can't vote. So am I a citizen or am I not a citizen?
What would it mean for you to get your rights back, to be able to vote?
It'll mean the world. But I can actually do something about it by punching in the ballot, you know?
Yeah, because that's an experience. You've never had that experience. You've never voted.
I never had it. I never had that experience.
Felon disenfranchisement also disproportionately affects minorities. In the 2004 presidential election, 1 in 12 African Americans was ineligible to vote. When focusing on Florida, 1 in 3 were disenfranchised. In Kentucky today, over 25% have lost their right to vote. However, many argue that one's voting power is very small. This short video explains why this idea is actually very wrong.
Plus, who says a few votes can make a difference? Check this out. In 2000, George W. Bush won Florida by only 537 votes. About 6 million votes were cast in Florida, which means that he won by only 0.009%. And this gave him the presidency. In 1839, Marcus Morden became the governor of Massachusetts thanks to 1 vote. So like, out of this pool of ducks, this one dude made history. I know it feels like our votes are microscopic, but so was that bacteria that caused the Black Plague and that killed about 25 million people. So small things can have a big impact.
One person does have the power to decide an election. Imagine if 6 million people could vote again. The politicians that were elected would more closely represent the ideas of the people.
It's not Republican, it's not Democrat. It is a basic American value, our basic right as guaranteed by the Constitution as a citizen of the United States.
The part of the Constitution that she is referring to is the 14th Amendment. This amendment guaranteed the rights of the citizen. However, as it made great strides for civil rights, it is also where supporters of felon disenfranchisement draw their support. Section 2 of the 14th Amendment states that one can have their right to vote rescinded in cases of rebellion or other crime. States have defined other crime as felonies. Since they do not lose representation by revoking this right, lawmakers have no incentive to change the law. However, people across the nation have been fighting for these laws to be changed, and they have started to have an effect. The biggest movement was in Florida. In November 2018, Amendment 4 in Florida was passed.
One of the ballot initiatives in Florida that has raised a lot of national attention, including statewide effort, has been Amendment 4, which would restore voting rights to felons. This affects over 1 million potential voters in Florida, and this is now, we've got a projected answer on Amendment 4 in Florida. It looks to be, it looks that Amendment 4 will pass. That's a big deal, not just for the people directly affected by having their voting rights restored in Florida. This is a big issue of racial justice because of the racial disproportionate impact of this.
This amendment allows felons who have completed their full sentence to vote, starting in the 2020 election. The only exclusions are murder and felony sexual offenses. Florida isn't the only state to restore voting rights to its formerly incarcerated. In 2016, Virginia voted to restore civil rights to former felons. Reporters interviewed a few of those who had their rights restored.
In an off-camera conversation, one of them told me that it makes him feel like a citizen again.
I've never been into an election like I have, like this one. I've watched every debate. I'm hyped. I'm really wanting to vote in this election. I think this is a very pivotal election. I think it's a good thing.
The passage of Amendment 4 and a similar law in Virginia have made great strides in the quest for voting rights for all, but there are still many changes that need to be made. To keep the spirit of democracy alive, new laws need to be passed that end felon disenfranchisement for those who have fully completed their sentences.